ransom has been paid. Systems are slowly coming back online, and the war room is running on caffeine and adrenaline. The chief financial officer is walking the board through the damage: emergency vendors, overtime, lost revenue, regulatory notices, and the cost of recovery. The mood is grim, but someone eventually says the sentence that has calmed many executives before. This is bad, but that is why we have cyber insurance. What almost no one expects is the letter that arrives days later. In careful legal language, it says the claim is denied. This is a Wednesday headline feature from Bare Metal Cyber magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber, and it is about the decisions that make that moment more or less likely long before the attack ever happens.
When that denial arrives, the incident stops being only a security failure. It becomes a financial and governance crisis. In the early hours, everyone focused on containment and recovery. The chief information security officer worried about lateral movement and data loss. Operations focused on restoring critical services. Communications worked to protect customers and the brand. In the background, leaders assumed the cyber insurance policy would eventually absorb a meaningful part of the cost. When the carrier pushes back, that assumption collapses. Now the board wants to know not just how the attacker got in, but how a contract the company has paid for over years now seems uncertain.
The tone in the room changes quickly. What once felt like a safety net now feels like another problem. Leaders start hearing phrases they rarely focused on before, such as late notification, failure to maintain minimum security standards, or misrepresentation during underwriting. Instead of debating recovery priorities, they are debating policy language. The CISO starts replaying every exception, temporary workaround, and "we will fix it next quarter" decision. The CFO wants to know exactly what was promised to the carrier and who approved those promises. The general counsel starts comparing the incident timeline against definitions, exclusions, and conditions buried in the policy.
That is when the fine print stops being abstract. A modern cyber insurance policy is not a simple promise to pay when something bad happens. It is a complex structure of coverage terms, exclusions, conditions, sublimits, waiting periods, and vendor requirements. On a summary slide, it may look simple. There is a limit, a list of coverages, and a price. On claims day, what matters is how the specific facts of the incident match the specific wording of the policy. Business interruption may sound broad, but the actual language may limit which outages count, when coverage begins, how long it lasts, and how losses are calculated.
The same is true for data restoration, forensic costs, and incident response expenses. Those phrases sound reassuring, but the policy may cap certain expenses, exclude certain systems, or require the use of approved vendors. Other exclusions can be even more subtle. Prior acts, unapproved vendors, and minimum security standards may feel like boilerplate during renewal. After an incident, they become the lens through which the carrier decides whether your claim fits inside the promise it sold you. The issue is not that this language is always unfair. The issue is that many leadership teams never translate it into operational terms, so they assume the headline limit tells the whole story.
It helps to think of the policy as part of the organization's risk surface. Attackers care about access, persistence, and leverage. Insurers care about definitions, conditions, and evidence. Both matter during a major incident. The quiet truth is that many policy terms are negotiable before a loss, but almost impossible to change afterward. When security, legal, and finance treat the policy as a technical and operational instrument, not just a procurement item, they can adjust definitions, negotiate carvebacks, and align the contract more closely with how the environment actually works.
There is another layer that matters just as much: the promises made during underwriting. Questionnaires and follow-up emails are not casual surveys. They shape how the carrier prices and accepts the risk. When an organization says MFA is required for all remote access,
The policy may be built around that statement as if it is consistently true. When a slide deck says endpoint detection and response is deployed across all critical endpoints, the underwriter may treat that as fact. Those statements become part of the story the contract assumes about your security posture.
In practice, those answers are often built from imperfect information. A security architect describes how controls are supposed to work. A vendor uses simplified marketing language. A broker cleans up the language to keep the process moving. Nuance gets lost. MFA on internet-facing administrative access becomes MFA everywhere. Backups that are tested regularly may gloss over the last failed restore test. Patch management descriptions may describe the ideal process, not the backlog of exceptions in production. None of this may feel dishonest at the time. It can feel like smoothing rough edges. But when a major claim is reviewed, the carrier compares the underwriting file against logs, configurations, and incident reports.
If reality differs too much from the application, the carrier may argue that there was misrepresentation or a failure to maintain required controls. That does not guarantee denial, but it can delay, narrow, or contest payment when the organization is most exposed. Known gaps should be documented. Exceptions should be tracked. Key statements should have clear ownership and approval. That way, the organization understands what it has promised before those promises are tested. Renewal should not be treated as a simple question of premium versus limit. A better question is, how insurable are we under this contract for the incidents that would truly hurt us? One useful approach is to choose realistic worst-case scenarios and walk them through the policy as if they already happened. Imagine a long ransomware outage against critical systems, then test the business interruption language. Imagine a business email compromise, then examine the funds transfer and social engineering coverage. Imagine a major cloud or software-as-a-service provider failure, then look closely at dependent business interruption language and which providers are actually in scope.
Those scenario reviews create better conversations. Legal can identify ambiguous terms. Finance can see where losses might remain unfunded. Security can see where assumed controls are not as universal as the policy suggests. The result may be a higher premium. It's not a perfect contract. The goal is a contract that behaves more predictably when a serious incident becomes a serious claim. Policy work still leaves one hard reality. On the day of a major incident, the organization must prove what happened and how it was operating. A healthier mindset is to assume that every major control, decision, and exception may need to be reconstructed months later for a skeptical audience. That does not mean turning incident response into a legal performance. It means preserving the same evidence that supports strong technical postmortems, clear timelines, preserved logs, documented decisions, and snapshots of key control configurations before and during the attack. This is where incident playbooks, ticketing systems, and change records become part of the insurance strategy. If the policy requires notification within a certain time, that requirement should be built into incident response processes and tabletop exercises. If the policy requires approved vendors, that should be known before the middle of the night. If coverage depends on maintaining specific controls, monitoring and governance processes should be able to show whether those controls were in place, whether they were effective, and whether any gaps were tracked and managed.
A useful leadership question is this. If a major incident from last year became a disputed claim today, could the organization tell a clear story with evidence? If the answer is no, evidence discipline should become part of resilience planning. Legal and risk should be involved in exercises, not just to approve language, but to see how facts are captured. Security metrics, audit findings, and policy attestations should connect more directly to the warranties and conditions in the cyber policy. Over time, the organization is building not just stronger controls, but a stronger ability to explain and defend what happened.
The deeper question is simple.
Is your cyber insurance policy a real instrument of risk transfer, or is it a comforting story until someone tries to use it? On one end, organizations buy policies based on optimistic descriptions of security, focus mostly on price and limits, and treat evidence as an afterthought. On the other end, organizations shape coverage around realistic scenarios, involve security, legal, and finance together, and run incident processes that assume major events will eventually need to be retold and defended. Leaders who understand this stop saying, "We have cyber insurance," as if that ends the conversation. Instead, they explain where coverage is strong, where it is fragile, and what is being done to close the gaps. They treat underwriting questionnaires as serious governance documents. They walk into renewal with concrete scenarios and hard questions. And when they run tabletop exercises, they do not stop once the attacker is contained. They continue into the claims process, where logs are preserved, decisions are documented, and the carrier is brought into the story.
No organization can eliminate every dispute or denial. Insurance is built on contracts, interpretation, and negotiation. But leaders can narrow the space where disagreements arise. They can make sure the story told in the policy is close to the story the environment would tell on its worst day. They can design incident response and governance practices that naturally produce the evidence a carrier needs to evaluate a complex claim. And they can judge their insurance strategy not only by the premium on the budget, but by their confidence that when someone says, "That is why we have cyber insurance," they are not relying on wishful thinking.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.